So I had a lady friend, who asked my opinion on getting lip fillers. She came up to me, is like, "Hey Fahad, I'm thinking about getting lip fillers. Do you think I should get it?" I wasn't sure how to respond to this. I was like, should I say, yes, you need one? Or do I say, no, you're fine? This was such a weird conversation, and it just led me into thinking more about this whole fad in North America about the BBLs, the liposuction, the lip fillers. How do I address that with a friend or with a partner when they bring that up? In this episode, we sit down and talk about body positivity and people's relationship with their image. Indulge. More, we talk about vanity and stuff, and how people feel like this pressure to hold some kind of status or appear a particular way to uphold a certain standard. Like, what impact does that have on like one's mental health? Or why do we even have to do that? Or why do people do it?
Why do people feel the need?
Oh, yeah.
I think that if you're only told that you're valuable based on, what you can offer, whether that's financially, materially, I can understand why there's pressure for, a men to wear, I don't know, a fake rollie or something of that nature, right? Like if you're told, for example, and maybe people legitimately have this experience, right? Maybe you're curating your online dating profile, and the second you post a picture of yourself with a nice car, you have more girls swiping on you, right? Or the second you post yourself, I don't know, with a nice watch or a boat or something that symbolizes status, you actually are more successful. You have more matches. So I think people are conditioned, probably, unfortunately, to think that, and their value is tied to these things and or their lifestyles. Right? So you can see how maybe this is reinforcing negative stereotypes to the point where people feel the need to project and or just pretend to be what they're not, right?
And even on the women's side too as well. Like there's a whole talk on beauty standards.
Yeah. Right. And if I post a picture on my profile where you can see my ass, I'm going to get 25% more likes, probably 50%, maybe even 100, right? But I don't want to do that because it inherently is probably going to attract people that I have an emphasis on like phenotype, on physical appearance, and maybe don't care about who I am as a person. Not necessarily, but it's a possibility, right? So again, I think when we look at social media and we also look at how algorithms are built. If you have success doing certain things, posting certain things, then again, your profile is probably more likely to be shown to certain suitors based on, again, what your pictures look like, maybe what your prompts look like. This is just how these things work. And so I think people get kind of caught up in these echo chambers where maybe they are curating an appearance because it has been more successful in terms of outcomes for them on apps and possibly even in real life, right? I think it's harmful probably on both sides that we feel the need to it's not always maybe outwardly pretending to be what we're not, but maybe just generally an overemphasis on things that we maybe would naturally emphasize about ourselves. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how does this impact take for example, a younger girl looking at this, the society we see glorifying this particular beauty standards, and how does that impact like a young Black girl, for example, on her mental health, like when she keeps seeing this?
It's really difficult, and it's so funny because I was just in Miami, and it occurred to me when I was in Miami that I was, oh my gosh, every girl has their body done here. And I'm not saying they don't look good. I mean, some of them don't look good, but a lot of them look really, really, really good. But, I had this thought, and I've had this thought for many years, but for myself personally, if I modify my appearance to the point where I have a daughter who is born who doesn't look like me, that is a problem. Right? The fact that I would feel the need to modify myself to the point where quite literally my children will not look like me is a problem. And I am actually all for, you can do what you want with your body. I'm all for it. Again, if you're happy, and in many of these cases, right? Look, maybe you had 4 kids and wanted to get your body done. You're done. You get a nice little nip and tuck. Look, women's bodies go through hell when you go through childbirth. I'm all for that, but I just think generally speaking, I am someone who had a mother who had certain, procedures and things done to the point where I had to ask myself growing up if, why I didn't look like that. This is a very real experience that I had in my own personal life. I thought to myself, why don't I look like my mom? Besides the fact that we have 2 different skin colors, but I'm like, why don't I look like that? Right? And so you start to think, okay, well, if so-and-so looks like that, if my mom looks like that, if my friends look like that, if that is what attracts men, then I have to do that to be attractive. And it's unfortunate because oftentimes it guarantees certain outcomes. It does, right? People make jokes about the fact that, you get your body done, you're set for life, right? You're going to attract a certain type of men. It's going to have a certain type of outcome, and you'll live happily ever after. In some cases, it's true, right? And so you see how this is harmful for people that, again, they don't want to overemphasize the physical, but when it's done, it's rewarded. It does guarantee certain outcomes. It becomes very confusing. I found it confusing growing up because then I have to ask myself, okay, so it's not really about who I am as a person or what I believe in or what I want in life. It's about what I look like. But I think we all have to be very realistic about the fact that we're not going to be young and good looking forever. You're probably none of us will be good looking past, let's say our 50s. I think I'll be good looking when I'm 50, but past our 50s, you never know, right? If you really desire to grow old with somebody, you can't emphasize what they look like. You just can't. They're not going to look like that forever. And if that's what you desire, then that's how you have, 67-year-old men dating 20-year-olds. Yeah. Is that right or appropriate? That's for them to decide, but that's the reality of it. If you're attracted to what somebody looks like rather than who they are as a person, you're probably going to be chasing that for the rest of your life. And then you're going to be old and miserable and like the creepy old guy trying to date 20-year-olds. So.
Yeah. And then I would like to ask, how did you deal with that mentally? And also the reason why I asked is because if you had a younger you
right.
and who maybe has experienced that same situation where, what advice would you give them or what would you tell them in regards to how to handle that kind of? Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people go through the same thing.
I think at the end of the day, what I was trying to get at previously is that beauty fades. Whatever you look like, it may be true that the way that you look might attract certain men and guarantee certain outcomes for you, but that will never last. And so you really have to, it's a conversation I have with myself, you really have to work on yourself and understand what makes you happy as a person and what you value rather than what other people value about you, right? So doing that inner work to understand, okay, well, if I get my body done or if I put these fillers in my face, is this actually making me happy or is this meant to attract somebody else? And making sure that you're making that distinction because, again, if it actually makes you happy, I actually think that you should do those things. If it has a negative impact on your mental health, that you don't like the way the bump in your nose looks and you get a nose job, you should do that if it makes you happy. But at the end of the day, I think you have to find the intrinsic motivation behind why you're doing what you're doing. If it's not for yourself, then it's for somebody else, right? Or it's just to, generally speaking, satisfy social norms. And it is really, really hard to delineate and or separate yourselves from social norms in that way. But I think it's really critical work. You have to understand yourself and what you value versus, again, what other people value in you.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in this episode, we talked about body positivity, but we approached it from a different angle. And a few angles that I wanted us to look at body positivity from was, number one, from the angle of the next generation of people who had to, maybe deal with their parents doing body augmentation procedures and stuff like that, and to see what the younger people, so you as a daughter who's seen your mother, augment her body, how does that make you feel? What does that do to you mentally? And also from a perspective of maybe from a partner in whatever type of relationship it is, so whether it be your love life or actually just friendship, when you have to deal with a friend or someone who may be going through body image issues and maybe wanted to seek your advice or ask you questions about what they should do or what route they should go through. I feel like on the other end, it's kind of difficult to approach or difficult to have that conversation with someone, whether it be your sister or a lover or something like that. How would you have that conversation? How do you tell them they're fine the way they are when they clearly, to them, they don't see themselves as fine, as okay? Like, how do you have that conversation? So I think that's what led us to having this episode, and I wanted to hear your take on this particularly.
Right. Yeah, I think just listening to Libby, she had some really good points when it came to kind of her, experience and some of the things that she's been able to see over time. I think that her assertions about, pretty privilege, quote unquote, she didn't necessarily use those words, but, I kind of gathered that that's what she was describing. Pretty privilege, or being rewarded for, matching, the heteronormative or like the kind of like idolized version of or standard of beauty. I think she was right about that. Definitely impacts your life, or how, kind of what jobs you get, if you're making friends, how you're connecting with other people. And I think that, we've kind of been socialized to, view people from the perspective of how they look, not necessarily the kind of value they can add based on some of these issues when it comes to body positivity. I know she had, you both kind of alluded to this as well, like being the first generation of kids, or, kind of that beginning generation. I'm sure it's more than that. I'm not really accurate on that just yet, but I think, when it comes to, kind of understand like, oh, my mom, had some surgery done, or plastic surgery done, or any augmentation or work done to her body, or my dad did this kind of, thing, and that changes a little bit about how you view yourself, because essentially we're a genetic representation of how our parents present, and so by looking at them, we can estimate roughly how we will look eventually, right? And so I think when it comes to being a child of a parent who has gotten some work done, and I think Libby was saying, I don't know if I can do that to my daughter, for her to see me and think that she'll look like me and then grow up and not look like me. There's several situations in which whereby children don't look like their parents. That's fine. But in this particular issue, when it comes to plastic surgery, I think we want to understand the motivation behind that. And so if you do have children and you're planning on getting some plastic surgery done, I think some controlled transparency would be beneficial. Definitely have the conversation, right? This is what, because they're going to see that you've changed. That's going to be obvious. So it's important to kind of say, okay, you know what, here is what I'm planning on doing. This is what the process might look like. And this is what is motivating me to do this, to undergo surgery for this, right? Here are some of the risks as well. And I'm still prepared to, kind of do this, go through this surgical procedure. Now, the motivation piece of it, I think, is where I really want to focus, because when it comes to how people view their bodies, there's a few things that inform that understanding. For example, I had a client who had a list of, all the things that different people had said about her body over time, from her adolescence up on, and it created several issues for her when it came to her self-esteem, and also kind of just, of course, there's some body dysmorphia there, how she viewed herself versus how she actually looked. There was a very big difference in that. And so some of the psychological impacts of this are, of course, you have eating disorders, anxiety, depression definitely is something that can come up, low self-esteem being an issue. When it comes to, eating disorders, you have anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorders, where you restrict for a significant amount of time and then, binge eat and overindulge, over exercising, fit fam. I hope that, the motivation for that is, rooted intrinsically in the fact that you just want to be healthy rather than I want to look this particular way only, right? And then, of course we have, a lot of these ideas around social media, surgical procedures, that like after you have had work done, that your body looks different from what it did before and you no longer feel comfortable within it, right? Because the person you're seeing in the mirror now looks completely different from who you saw before, and maybe you may not have gotten the results that you wanted. These things also have psychological impacts as well. So when it comes to mitigating some of these issues, I would say one of the things that you want to do, if you are, for example, in Libby's case, kind of have a parent who's undergoing any surgical procedure to modify their body, it is important. It is their responsibility to have the conversation with you around some of the topics we discussed earlier. And it's up to you now to take responsibility for your own body and how you want that to look. And your parents can help in kind of guiding that understanding, but essentially that's developed by several factors outside of them. On my client's list, some African auntie at a wedding had said, hey, you put on weight, oh my God, like what's going on, and asking certain questions. I think one of the biggest things that we want to consider is body neutrality. Try to like not have opinions about other people's bodies. And if you do, keep them to yourself. I think we spend a lot of time with ourselves enough to know what our bodies look like, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we need the opinions of other people to kind of help us know what we look like. I think, mirrors were invented for this particular reason, right? So I know there's a bit of sarcasm and attitude there, but, I've just seen a lot of people experience significant amounts of pain as a result of this. And I feel like it's a bit of a heart-wrenching topic for me personally, because I get my clients who don't need to be going through things like this, and kind of recalling some of the things on that list I think were very brutal to have been said to her, and I think that definitely impacted the way she saw herself. It impacts work, it impacts her relationships, it impacts her relationships with friends, because what you're doing is isolating the person and creating a space whereby they don't feel safe, and that they are now meant to experience shame. And shame, has some psychosomatic impacts. I think we all know what shame feels like in your body. It's kind of like pins and needles, that feeling of wanting the floor to open. We've all experienced it. It's not a good feeling. Why do we want to perpetuate that? And put that on other people. So body neutrality is one of the best ways to kind of deal with this, and also for ourselves, right? You look in the mirror, maybe today you just kind of don't feel like you like the way you look. You can say, all right, you know what? This is my body. It's healthy. It's functional. It's working for me, or these are the abilities I have if you're differently abled. And you say, okay, it's working today and I'm alive. And so we're going to go ahead and do what we need to do, because your perspective may be skewed, right? We have so many influences. You might have been scrolling and seen some guy with a 6-pack and some like crazy back muscles the night before. And now you looked in the mirror the next morning and you're like, hey, this is what I was expecting to see today. Where you went to the gym last night and you came back and you're already looking for abs. All of these things, these actions we do, the body checks, the nitpicking at this and that, skin issues, this spot here, this skincare routine, this, that. I mean, a lot of these things just put unnecessary pressure, and you can see how the anxiety can develop over time if you feel like you can't put your best self forward. And your best self isn't necessarily always how you look. It's what value you add. So I want to kind of change that perspective and move more towards body neutrality, and in the sense that, like, what, my body is what it is, and that's okay. I don't have to, change it. But if you feel like you do want to change it, that is also fine. I will just say, reconsider some of those motivations. Why is it that you want to modify your body? Is this rooted in some kind of, a body image issue or body dysmorphia, or is it based on things that other people have said or negative feedback you've received regarding your body? Or is it just because you feel like this will make you feel better about yourself, or it makes you a little bit more confident, or it's actually something that, you know, maybe you had a burn or something and you want to kind of change that, or maybe you were a kid and you know, chopped your ear off somehow playing rough, I don't know. And you want to, that was the original idea around plastic surgery. But hey, you know, if you do, you know, you've taken time to think about it and you've reflected on it and you feel like, hey, you know, there are no underlying issues here that I need to deal with intrinsically within myself, then you can go ahead. But I would say check in first before going ahead to modify your body. And then when it comes to relationships, you know, this is an interesting one because, you know, people have their preferences. You know, I could ask you gentlemen, okay, you know, if you know, saw a girl, you know, what would be the first thing that, you know, you would see, or how would you notice her personality first, or what would be, you know, right. So you know, of course, you know, people have their preferences. You know, there are situations whereby, you know, I've heard, you know, that, you know, certain people have said, you know, my boyfriend said I want, you know, change my body this way. Or my husband said, oh, after kids, you know, maybe I should do this work or that work, you know, and, you know, I asked him to pay for it and he's going to pay for it and he's going to do this. And so you've made yourself a
canvas,
you know, you know, something to be customized for someone else's, I don't know, to their own specifications or desires. What about you? In relationships, of course, people evolve and they change. If you're going to be with someone long term, you must have accepted that they will grow old, or their bodies will change based on life experience or any other, you know, conditions. Maybe they have a child or there's a health condition, you know. Things could change in the way they look. They may not always look the same way from the first day you met them. And so, you know, the hope is that you value them based on, you know, kind of, you know, who they are and not how they look particularly. But people have different aspects of themselves that maybe they like more than others. My focus would be, you know, kind of validate those parts of yourself, and the parts that you don't necessarily like so much, validate those parts too, because they're there and they're there to stay. Enjoy your body. You don't get to be in it forever.
I think when you're dealing with somebody who may be going through something like that, I think it's a good question, a good conversation to have right before we even go down the route of doing some augmentation or body modification. It's something you have to think about. And actually, what's actually motivating you to do that change? It's a great question to ask, and I feel like it's a great conversation to have. So that's something I never had before, and thank you so much for pointing that out.
Absolutely. My
thank
pleasure.
you so much for this.
Of course, gentlemen. Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Cheers.
Cheers.